Welcome to How the Brain Reads. We will be starting in about 5 minutes. We will begin in 2 more minutes. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our session, How the Brain Reads. My name is Des Arnold. I am a staff developer in educational services at LIU, and my specialization is literacy. I am also one of our LETRS trainers. Before we get started with today's session, I want to go over some meeting norms. We ask that you please be engaged, and we understand that this looks different for everybody. We are aware that many of you are working from home, and that means that you have families and pets and life kind of happening all around you, and we understand. And as professionals, we ask that you make the decision that is best for your priorities according to your judgment. We honor all perspectives, so if you have something that you would like to say or discuss, please feel free to unmute yourself or put it in the chat. Your microphones were all disabled upon entry, but you can raise your hand or chat or just unmute yourself if you'd like to speak. If you are able to, please show your video. Again, we are aware that you're working from home and you might not be comfortable opening or showing your video and opening your home for everybody to see. And we completely understand. Do what's comfortable for you. And we ask, as always, that you assume good intentions. There will be a Q&A after I give you all of our information today. If you have any questions or concerns, you can bring them up then, or feel free to chat along as we are, hold on one second. Feel free to use the chat option as well. I'm sorry, I'm in my basement and it is very dry down here today and I have a tickle in my throat. You will be awarded your Act 48 credits upon completion of the evaluation, which is due by July 31st. Today's outcomes. We are going to examine the reading brain. We are going to discuss brain research and different reading research models. And we are going to apply research and reading models to learning to read. Today's big idea . Speech is natural, learning to read is not. Our speech is the ability to communicate through talk, and this is wired into our brains. We have physical aspects like a tongue, teeth, lips, vocal cords for just that purpose. But we do not have a reading part specific to our brain, nor are we born with the ability to just naturally read. Just like learning the piano, that doesn't come naturally to some, we must learn how to read. Therefore, reading must be taught. Because of its complexities, we must learn these complexities so that we can best instruct students on learning to read. Human brains are hardwired to speak. Our oral language is a foundational skill for later reading and writing development. And students with difficulty in oral language development are at higher risk for reading and writing difficulties. Reading needs to be explicitly taught. Ooh. I'm sorry, I thought there was another bullet point. Okay. This is one of my favorite things to talk about. This is the reading brain. Isn't it beautiful? So this is a representation of the left side of the brain. I'm not sure if you guys can all see me while I'm talking with the slides up. But over the last decade, researchers have used fMRIs, which is a functional MRI, which shows specific blood flow in the brain while the brain is working, to show what happens when the brain reads. They were able to see the parts of the brain that were working, and they have been able to see the places that aren't working when readers struggle. They've learned that reading primarily happens on the left hemisphere of the brain. So How does reading occur in your brain? So I was taught in my letters training to use my hand, but I'm not sure that I can really do that on Zoom. So you can see the back portion of the brain. Hold on, I have a laser pointer in my Zoom. Do I? Can you see my mouse move? Ah, okay, yay. Okay, so back here is your occipital lobe. I want you to, when we talk about our occipital lobe, we're talking about the things that our eyes can see. So when you read, the first thing that happens is your occipital lobe is activated in the back of your brain, and you see the letters. And then your frontal lobe over here, then your frontal lobe is activated. This is where your phonological processor is. This is the part of your brain that interprets speech sounds. Now, fun fact, the part of your brain that processes speech sounds and the part of your brain that processes environmental sounds like a car horn or a dog barking are totally different parts of your brain. So this is just for phonemes, speech sounds. So first, your occipital lobe is activated by seeing the sounds, and then your frontal lobe in here for your pronunciation and articulation, that's activated for the sounds that those symbols represent. And that is bridged together with a part of your brain that goes from the frontal to the parietal, back like this. And that is called the angular gyrus. That is my favorite part of the brain to say, angular gyrus. And that is your phonics bridge. It's the bridge that communicates the sound-symbol relationship. So you see the word, you can hear what each of the sounds in the letter of the word are, and it's bridged together through your angular gyrus. Down here in your temporal lobe is your visual word form area. This is where word recognition occurs. This is where your sight recognition is stored. And this is where your fluency in decoding occurs. And then to the left of that, still in our temporal lobe, is where your language comprehension happens. Any questions about what our brain looks like or does? So here is a picture of a functional MRI. Our top brain is an average reader. So you can see, let me pull up my little, here. Sorry, technical difficulties. So you can see the this portion here that is very well lit, that is the angular gyrus that I was telling you about, the bridge that connects the sound and symbols. And there's less activity in the frontal lobe where the phonological processor is activated. That's because this reader, this is a 9-year-old reader. So this reader does not have to rely on that phonological processor to decode words. They are a more fluent reader and they're relying, you can see down here in the bottom, their visual word form is also pretty well lit. That means that they have a lot of word recognition and sight vocabulary as well. And you can see the difference between the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. I told you that reading primarily happens on the left side of the brain. So our bottom picture here is an unremediated or poor reader. And you can see that they are relying heavily on that phonological processor to decode words, and their angular gyrus is not well lit. They're having problems bridging the sound symbol relationship. So you can see here again, the front is well lit. Our visual word form is not as well lit up. So our poor reader is really struggling on the concept of decoding. So one of the models that I want to talk to you about is the simple view of reading. And the simple view of reading is really just the simplest explanation of reading. So our simple view of reading is word recognition times language comprehension equals reading comprehension. Now, a lot of times when we're teaching reading, we think of this as an addition problem. You take your word recognition, you add your language comprehension, and you get reading comprehension. But let's talk about that multiplication symbol. When we add word recognition with no language comprehension, we still get a sum when we're adding. But when we're multiplying, what happens when you multiply something by 0? It equals 0. So let's take a look at a reader. Let's look at somebody who has no word recognition, but great language comprehension. When we multiply 0 times 1, we don't have reading comprehension. We still have a poor reader. So when we're when we are talking about our students who have very poor word recognition, but excellent language comprehension, we're talking about our students who could be dyslexic. And when you break down the word dyslexic, you have dys, D-Y-S, which means difficult, lex, L-E-X, which means word, and the ending ic, I see, as an adjective to describe a person. So dyslexic is somebody who has difficulty with words. And this is the type of reader that you might see, one that doesn't have good word recognition, but has excellent language comprehension. But when somebody has great word recognition and no language comprehension, we're multiplying, we still don't have reading comprehension. And this is where our hyperlexics would come in. Hyper meaning over or excessive. Sometimes we refer to these as word callers. I think of a lot of students that I've taught who were on the spectrum, who were excellent at reading words, but had no concept of what they meant. They had great word comprehension, no language comprehension, and therefore were poor readers. What happens though when a student has sort of good word recognition? They can kind of read words. They've got some word attack skills and great language comprehension. Do we get a good reader? Nope, we still have a sort of good reader. And it's not until we have good word recognition, good language comprehension, multiply those together, and we have reading comprehension. We have a good reader. This is really the simplest view of what reading looks like. This is the 4-part processor. This is the work of Marilyn Adams, and it really illustrates how the different parts of the brain have to activate in order to reach the goal of comprehension. So while we're talking about this, I want you guys to go back to that brain that I showed you earlier and think about how this applies. We have We have our phonological processor, which is where we process all of those speech sounds. And we have the orthographic processor, which is where we process our written words. That is bridged together through phonics, through our angular gyrus. I say it every opportunity I have, I'm sorry. And once you have your phonological processor and your orthographic processor working and that phonics bridge really activated, then your brain is able to create meaning of those words. And once your meaning processor is activated, then you can create context, and your context processor is activated. Let's take another look at this model. This just gives you a little bit of a better in-depth look at the four-part processor. So you can see our phonological processor is our speech sound system, and this is our language input and language output. Our phonological processor is really responsible for most of our oral language. It's what we hear for speech, but also what we say. And just like our phonological processor is responsible for input and output, so is our orthographic processor. It's how we read and write. It's our memory for letters. Our meaning processor gives meaning to those words. It's where our vocabulary is. And once all three of these down here are working well together, we have context activated, which is our concepts and information. It's our sentence context and text structure. We can't have meaning or context if we don't have our phonological processor and our orthographic processor activated. I want you guys to think about building a house. When you build a house, where do you start? With the foundation. You need a nice solid foundation to build your house on. You would never start building a house from the roof. It's very similar when we look at our four-part processor. You need that solid base before you can start building up. Reading is a bottom-up model. We have to start at the bottom with the foundation, and we have to build up through meaning and context. But we can't do that. You can't understand something that you can't read. Any questions about the four-part processor? Scarborough's reading rope is another one of the models that I love to share with people because it is so well illustrated. Scarborough, Hala Scarborough is actually a reading teacher turned scientist. And this was an illustration that she gave to parents to help parents understand how reading occurs. So the bottom part of the rope is word recognition. This is where phonological awareness and decoding and your sight recognition happens. Now, I'm going to sidestep and I want to talk to you guys about sight recognition. A lot of times we think of our sight recognition, our sight words, as high frequency words, your Fry list or your Dolch list. In reading research, sight words are words that are recognized easily by sight. Your sight words and my sight words are not necessarily going to be the same. And likewise, my husband, who's a mechanic, his sight words and my sight words aren't going to be the same. If he looked at this slide, there would be some words that he would really have to work at decoding. I look at this slide and most of these words are committed to my sight memory. They are sight words for me. You're not going to find them on your Dolch list or your Fry list though. Those are high frequency words. So it's important that we understand the difference between our high frequency words and our sight words. A student might have high frequency words committed to their sight word memory, but that doesn't mean that all of their sight words were on that high frequency list. And it doesn't mean that all of their high frequency words are committed to sight memory, if that makes sense. So when I talk today about sight words, I'm specifically talking about words that are committed to sight memory. So when we look at the bottom part of this rope of word recognition, it is all braided together. It's its own separate line of reading. And when we braid our word recognition strands together nice and tightly, we increase automatic reading. And then our top strand is our language comprehension. Things like vocabulary and verbal reasoning, knowledge literacy. These are twisted tightly together to create language comprehension. Now I'm thinking back to my days as a student and how we would make friendship bracelets with thread. And if I think just a little further back to my days at camp, I know that that same thread can be pulled apart to cross stitch. Each thread for a friendship bracelet has 6 strands, and you pull 2 strands apart for cross stitch. Those 4 strands that are left now cannot be used to make a friendship bracelet. It's no longer strong enough. And the same thing can be said for the reading rope. If you pull apart the strands of language comprehension, your rope doesn't have the strength that it needs to create a good reader. When you have those language comprehension strands twisted tightly together for good language comprehension, reading gets increasingly strategic. When you take your lower strands of word recognition and your upper strands of language comprehension and you twist them together, you get fluent execution and coordination of language comprehension and word recognition. You get a skilled reader. Does the upper strand and the lower strand sound familiar, like something we've already looked at? One of the things that I love about reading research and brain research is the way it kind of all fits together. What do we notice about the 4 models that we talked about? Is anybody willing to unmute and share something that they've noticed? Oops. Let me show you something that I've noticed. Let me turn off my pointer. There we go. Slides behind. When I turn my 4-part processor upside down, nope, not when I turn it upside down, when I leave it right side up, I see very similarly to the brain model. I can see my phonological processor in the front. I can see my orthographic processor in the back, which would be our occipital lobe, where we see our written language. And then our meaning and our context fall down here in language comprehension, which was why I thought I had to flip it upside down, but I didn't. Are there any other similarities that we notice? Katie, I can see that you've unmuted, but I can't hear what you're saying. I cannot hear you now. Hold on a second. Let me see if I can help. You're trying again? I don't know. Okay, Katie wants to connect the rope model. What do you notice about it? I can see she's typing. If you turn it so that the language and word are at the base, so you want me to like turn it upside down now? Like this? It builds up to skilled reading. Yes. So that is a very nice way of looking at it, because what you did was you put it so that our foundations are at the bottom and it builds up, much like our 4-part processor. And I've never looked at it that way because I became very rigid. And when I had it like this, we have our word recognition times language comprehension. And it never occurred to me to just put those out of order, because a multiplication problem can be out of order and you'll still get the same product. But when we flip it like that, we've created a foundation with a solid base that builds up to skilled reading, much like our 4-part processor. They're all really kind of the same thing. All 4 things that we're talking about really have the same outcome. We have to take our word recognition and our language comprehension to make good readers. And it doesn't matter if you're looking at a brain or the 4-part processor or the simple view of reading or Scarborough's rope. They all tell us the same thing in varying amounts of detail. Phonological awareness and orthographic processing, along with phonics, have been shown in studies to be the base that is needed to create good readers. Early exposure to letters is critical, to sound in letters is critical even before school begins. Richards and Talal say that there are 4 things that children must learn. Awareness that speech is composed of the smallest meaningful units of sound, which are phonemes. Awareness of letters or graphemes and word parts, which would be morphemes, are visual language symbols. A recognition that written letters represent sounds. This is the alphabetic principle. And an understanding that phonemes and morphemes can be manipulated. So even when we look at the 4 things that are needed for children, we're looking at phonological processing and then orthographic processing and then bridging it with phonics. And this is our base. I love this graph. The first time I saw it and it was explained to me, I totally nerded out on this concept. So this graph is based on data from the Connecticut longitudinal study in 1997. It was the largest longitudinal study of this topic ever done. So what this graph shows is the proportion of variance in comprehension accounted for by decoding skills. So how the relationship to decoding and comprehension changes over time. The purpose of reading is meaning, but reading development in the beginning stages requires the mastery of skills, such as letter recognition and naming, phonemic awareness, sound symbol correspondence, the ability to apply sound symbol associations to reading new words, word recognition habits. So I learned recently through letters that the instructional time for English language arts should include 2 hours or more in kindergarten. And in first grade should be a minimum of 90 minutes. Nope, I'm sorry. 2 hours in kindergarten and first grade and a minimum of 90 minutes in second and third. I thought that I was missing some grades in there. I apologize. Foundational skills instruction should take about half that time in kindergarten and first grade. That means that 1 hour of your literacy block should be dedicated to teaching the foundational skills. Letter naming, word recognition, sound symbol relationships, phonemic awareness. Your foundational skills don't require as much time in second and third grade. This is known as the difference between learning to read versus reading to learn. Over time, the amount of time spent on foundational skills versus comprehension will shift. When we talk about balanced literacy, when we talk about balancing our literacy block, we do not mean that everything gets equal amount of time. We mean that there is a balance that is proportionate to that age's learning requirements and needs that will shift over time to create balance in learning effectively. You obviously would not spend the same amount of time on phonemic awareness with a kindergartner as you would a third grader. Just like you wouldn't spend as much time teaching reading comprehension to a fourth grader as you would a first grader. And this graph is really an excellent visual to show that. So I want to take a moment and I want to open it up. I hope that we're not having mic issues the whole way around, but I want to open it up and see if anybody's got any questions. The reading brain, how the brain reads, is a big topic, and I did my best to condense it, and I don't know that I went slow enough. I'm concerned that I blew over too much. So if anybody has any questions, now would be a great time to ask you to clarify or elaborate. I'm gonna stop sharing so that I can see if somebody unmutes. No questions? No one at all? Do you have a recommended resource or book that you recommend? There are tons. The very first one that I would recommend is Speech to Print by Louisa Moats. I also highly recommend the letters trainings. Right now we have the 3rd edition happening at the LIU. It's a hybrid model. There is an online portion and a large book, actually. So you get a big spiral book like this, and this is 4 units of study. And there is, to go along with that, an online portion that has videos and in-depth information that you can do at your own pace. There's also a bridge to practice, and then there's a facilitation that would occur with myself and or Corinne Connor, one of our other staff developers. And along with all of that, there's this amazing bridge to practice where you are given the tools to apply in your classroom. And then you have the opportunity to rely on your facilitators to come in and help you with your bridge to practice. There is also a Facebook group. I really hate to plug Facebook in a professional setting, but it is an excellent group. It is called The Science of Reading: What I Didn't Learn in College. It's a wealth of information. One of the administrators, moderators, I'm not sure, in that group is Dr. Pam Kastner, who is our state literacy lead at Patton. She also is one of the leads for our chapter of the Reading League. So that was a lot of resources. The Reading League is also another excellent resource, and they have links to lots of books as well. Any other questions? Well, I will put my screen back up. At the end of the day, you will have the opportunity to complete your evaluation. Between now and then, we would like you to think about, did this webinar meet your expectations? How you will share or use the information that you learned today, and what key information resonated with you. And you can head back over to your schedule. I believe next up is a PM keynote with Dr. Sarah Powell on the essentials of a multi-tiered system of support in mathematics. I will hang out here if anybody has any questions. I won't close it out. We were supposed to go until noon. It always throws me off when nobody's got questions. I underestimate myself, I think. We also have a Science of Reading professional development. Not exactly sure what everything looks like this year, but it is definitely something that we can turn into a virtual learning opportunity. It takes everything that we talked about today and then some, and it really dives deep into the science of reading, if that's something that you guys are interested in as well.
I was just going to say thank you for doing these 2 sessions. I was in your last one.
I remembered your face.
Yeah, they were really good. I was just looking at the Facebook group that you had recommended, and I'm looking through it, and it's like, oh my goodness, so many resources.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't think of tapping into something like Facebook for professional purposes, but it's that group. If I've got a question, I really go there.
Yeah, it's awesome. So would you say, because I teach 3rd grade, so it's kind of interesting because it is like that cusp of, reading to learn now, but then you've got some kids who are also still in the learning to read stage. So would you say the best kind of tactic to meet everyone's needs is through guided reading, and like you kind of address where kids are in that respect?
So I recommend skilled groups.
Okay.
I don't necessarily recommend guided reading levels. What are you doing for assessments? Are you doing something like Dibbles?
Well, we used to do Dibbles, but then we stopped doing Dibbles, and now we do the Scholastic Reading Inventory.
Okay.
So
when you look at things like letters or even a program like Wilson, they were developed with older students. Wilson was created for adults who had learning disabilities, and letters, the research for letters started in high school classrooms. And what Dr. Tolman learned while she was working on letters was that a lot of her students who were coming to her and couldn't read didn't have phonemic awareness. And when she went back and activated that phonological processor and started teaching them about phonemes and how to manipulate them, it created a phonics bridge they didn't have before, and they suddenly became good readers. And what she learned was that parents were very interested in not fixing problems because Dr. Tolman would take care of it later. So she stopped working at the high school level and went down to the elementary level to make it so that there weren't problems later. So when you have students who have difficulty reading in like 3rd grade, if you did an assessment, a phonological assessment, like a PAST, to find out where they are phonologically, you're likely going to find out that there's some deficit in there, and that's what's preventing them from being good readers. And you're not going to fix that problem with a guided reading book.
Right.
By any chance, are you planning on coming to my 3rd session, structured literacy and balanced literacy?
I think I was looking at that, yeah.
Okay, so we're actually going to talk about some of the differences, but guided reading books are predictable and rely heavily on the 3 cueing system to be able to read them. And when you have students who are having reading difficulties, if you find out what skills they're lacking and work on filling those skills through connected texts or decodables, it's more beneficial to the student. Programs like the 95% group, where you can give the student the assessment, find out what skills they're missing, and then hone in on those skills intensively through lessons that are for that skill specifically. So if it's a long A skill, or if it's incorporating your word work into those lessons and interventions and small group sessions in a guided reading style. The idea of guided reading is excellent. I don't recommend the guided reading leveled books to go along with it when you're trying to remediate those skills.
Gotcha. So if you use, because we have the PA Core, or no, not the PA Core, sorry. Oh my gosh, I can't remember what it's called. It's a way to assess where kids are with phonemic awareness, and I can't remember what it is. I wish I could remember. But that's kind of how I was targeting where kids were falling out with their phonics. And I wish I could remember what it was called, but I can't. Okay, but that's good to know, because that's kind of what I was doing, but using the guided readers, but targeting the skill and not necessarily like following the script that you're supposed to use for that. So, but that's good to know.
Well, and West Virginia, If you Google West Virginia phonics lessons,
Okay.
you can get for free phonics lessons on just about any skill
Okay. And then
already written up for you.
the other thing was called the 95th or the 95%.
95%, yeah.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, that's good to know. And then when you said about like the 90 minutes of instruction, is that including anything that you would be doing with interventions, or is that like no?
Nope, that's just tier 1 instruction.
Okay. Okay. Because I know we don't have 90 minutes.
You know, a lot of places don't, and you know, you don't know what you don't know. And I learned so much about MTSS and tier 1 and advanced tiers and all kinds of stuff this year. And one of the things that was a real hot topic was this concept of guided reading and it being tier 1 instruction. And our department head, Tanya Moret, is a genius. Absolutely amazing woman to sit down and have a conversation with. She is a wealth of knowledge. There was a discussion about guided reading and how if you're not doing work on grade level, how that becomes remediation and is no longer tier 1 instruction. So there was a big discussion about that, but if you're working on, I don't remember how we worded it. If you're working on grade level skills, but using an easier text, it was still tier 1 because it was the same skill. You were just giving them an easier text to read, I think was what we decided. It's, there's so much, there's so much research and there's so much evidence and there's so much, and we don't know what we don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, because that's a lot of time. And I mean, it's necessary time, but it's just not time that you have during the day.
However, you're to benefit in 3rd grade because you're talking about reading to learn. So those comprehension skills that you're explicitly teaching can be taught using your social studies text.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. We're departmentalized, so I don't teach social studies. I just teach ELA. But yeah, you can definitely address those skills through that.
Right.
Yeah.
And what district are you in?
Dover.
Okay. I think that I've done a little bit of work with Dover. Younger.
Yeah, actually, Dr. McCusker has been in with us. So yeah, it's been really fun. Fun to learn new things. All right. Well, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks for hanging out.
Yeah, and I'll probably see you later because I think I was planning on going to that next time.
Okay.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks. Shannon, were you hanging out because you had questions too?